Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Tiffany Taylor, and I have the pleasure of serving as GSV's Chief People and Impact Officer, and I am so thrilled to be in community with these dynamic leaders. We're talking about what does it mean for us to drive organizational change in ways that allow us to disrupt inequity. So I am going to have us start off slightly in a different way. I know you don't want me to hear, you don't want to hear me reading long bios. So I'm going to ask our panelists to do two things. One, introduce yourselves, and then two, tell us who you are in 3 words, who you are as a leader.
Okay.
No explanation.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Just 3 words.
3 words?
Yes.
What if it's just 2? Is that okay? I am Melissa Yates May. I am the Chief People Officer for Cambium Learning Group. And if I could just sum up me as a leader, it would probably be empathetic, a champion, and that's probably it. Those are the 2 big things for me.
All right. I'll take it.
Good afternoon. My name is Lucino, Sotelo. I have 2 jobs. One, I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Northern Trust. And the reason I'm here, I actually sit on the board of the Chicago Board of Education. So in order to serve in the board, you need to be conscious, you need to be collaborative, and you need to be courageous.
Yes. Thank you.
Hey, y'all. I am Dr. Barbara Logan Smith. I have the privilege and responsibility of leading our Office of Equity and Belonging at Teach for America. And my 3 words, because Tiffany said 3 with no definitions or explanations,
Thank you.
which was my path to 50, my 3 words are equity, belonging, and grace.
All right. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm Antoinette Chukudebelu. I'm the Chief People and Equity Officer at Murmuration. And my 3 words are dynamic, transformative, and empathetic.
I love it. All right. And I wanted to start there because in order for us to do people work, we first need to understand who we are as leaders, because that always impacts how we show up and how we support those who are under our charge. So when we came together to consider this conversation, we quickly acknowledged that many companies and organizations and districts have doubled down, and in some cases, they've tripled their efforts as it relates to disrupting inequity. But the unfortunate reality is that many of those efforts are insufficient at best. I'd love to just start by hearing your thoughts on why that insufficiency persists despite the declarations of commitment, right? And despite the reallocation of resources at times. And Barbara, I'd love to start with you.
Oh, I love this question. When I was in undergrad taking a psych class, one of the things they talked about was the idea of necessary but insufficient. And I think part of my answer to this question, Tiffany, is that we figured out that some things are necessary. Like, it is necessary to have representation. There's no question that you should be able to look around an organization and not see a single archetype. You ought to be able to see folks who look like you, who are from your background, and also folks who are not. And so we've been really focused on that in a lot of organizations. But diversity and representation are necessary. They are also insufficient. And so if our efforts are only focused on making sure that there's representation, then you don't consider the culture. You don't consider what actually has to be true for people who don't fit the original archetype, whatever that is. You don't consider how you make space for other folks. You design an organization around a particular person, a particular profile, and then everybody else is supposed to figure out how to be that. Let's assimilate. Well, that doesn't work. And so part of my answer is we're focused on what's necessary, but we don't understand in and of itself that's insufficient. You've got to go do some culture work. You've got to go spend some real time in your data. And don't just ask the traditional questions like, how many of these people do we have in this role or this position or that position? You've also got to ask yourself the question, what is the lived experience of people who are operating and organizing inside this place? And if that lived experience has gaps, if that lived experience is still positioning folks to not have what they need to be positioned to make a contribution that matters, both to the organizational mission, but also to them. If that's not what's true, then there's a bunch more work to do. And so I would just offer that part of what is happening is we are short-sighted in our understanding of what it means to truly create a space where belonging exists for all people because of their different identities. And because we are looking at the data in ways that allow us to tell a great story. Yay, we're great on diversity. But that's an incomplete story because we're not also considering what it feels like to be in a space where I don't fit the mold and therefore I'm not positioned to make a contribution that matters. So I don't get elevated, I don't get recognized, I don't get seen. I actually feel like I'm in the way. So that's how I would start us off thinking about this question.
Thank you. All right, Melissa?
So I would just add on to that because I agree with everything that you just said. I think, too, starting with managers, right? Like, I think sometimes we look at just the top-level leaders to hold the torch for certain initiatives, and then we kind of let our managers kind of find their way on their own. Yeah. And then what happens is it doesn't get embedded into the culture of what your organization is. And so then it becomes this initiative that's to the side. Yeah. And that's why it never really gets to that point where it needs to be, because managers even struggle with how to support their people. And so at Cambium, we've started to really focus on making sure our employees are feeling seen, valued, and supported, just like we do for teachers and students. Yeah. And meeting them where they are, including our managers. So investing in manager training, making sure that they understand the decisions they make, right? Because they're hiring people. Yeah. They're making decisions on promotions, those types of things, and understanding the impact they have in everybody's life in that way.
Appreciate that.
What she said. So, a couple of things that I would add. One is, in order to define what sufficient is, you have to agree on what the definition of success is up front. Yeah. And I think one of the challenges is that we do not have that alignment up front, right? Because there actually is sufficiency, but is it sufficiency on all the levers of equity? And I would argue that it's not, right? So we need to make sure that we agree on what are the key levers to get to equity, right? And once you do that, if we spend enough time on embracing what we do have and invest on what we do have to make sure they understand what equity looks like and feels like with the students, we will make a long way, as one example.
I appreciate that. So this question of alignment, I think sometimes, who are we aligning with, right? I think sometimes our employees can let us know is that you've taken a lot of time aligning with members of the C-suite or that school board, right? But what does it mean to get into community with your team, right, at every single level? How do you engage them in a way that allows you to be truly connected and understand what their needs are? Would love to hear the answer to that question, but first I'd love to hear the answer. How do you understand how those needs have shifted, right? The Great Resignation is on everybody's mind. Everybody is scrambling for talent. How have things shifted in terms of what employees are saying, I want to get aligned with you, but actually I'm actually trying to make a demand because I know what my worth is? So we got a little bit of silence. I give you a little I think we're all thinking it. We're all saying, yes, I've been evaluating my worth these days too, right? But how do you stay connected to that? And how have things shifted?
Well, I think things have shifted a lot. And so we talk a lot about how the market is really an employee market right now, and employers need to adjust. We need to look at our organizations and make sure that we are thinking about our people in new and dynamic ways, because if we don't, they're saying, bye, see you later, and I'm going to go to the next organization. And so in order to really do that, we need to hear from our folks. We need to do more focus groups. We need to listen, and I mean really listen. A lot of times organizations say that they're listening to their people, and then there's no change, there's no impact. So it feels like a waste of time for an employee to sit down and talk to the organization when nothing was done. So it has to really be about having opportunities to hear people and then making strategic actions that show that you have listened, and at least looping back to people to say, I heard you, here's what we did, or here's what we couldn't do, and at least being transparent about that. The transparency of organizations is new, and it is something that many organizations are really struggling with.
I'd love to hear for a couple more people on that question, but I also love to hear you reflect on this element of trust, right? Because we've been having focus groups, right? We have been engaging our folks through our ERGs. And we're still not meeting the mark in some ways. And I think what's underneath some of that is a lack of trust. And so when you think about engagement, can you share with us, how do you cultivate a culture of high trust in your organizations in ways that allow folks to feel valued, seen, and heard, and with you in stewarding a strong culture?
I'll take that one.
We'll go.
So one of the things that we did this year, because we went to a remote-first environment, we did listen to our employees. They really didn't want to come back into an office building. And historically, Cambium had been very dedicated to the office. So you didn't hire outside of a certain purview and things like that. So this has really opened up opportunity to bring in people that you wouldn't normally have the opportunity to bring on board to your teams. But with the remote-first environment, you lose some of the connection. So one of the things that we've done is every town hall that we do, which we do on a quarterly basis, we also hold an open office hours where we allow employees to actually ask questions, and we answer those questions to everybody. And so it's not always the answer that people want to hear, but I do think that since we take the time to do it and we don't shy away from any question, people respect that, right? Because they feel that they're being respected in the way of being listened to.
So I will add a couple of things to that. In order to establish trust, and it's actually in addition to what you said, you definitely need to listen and play back. Yeah. But then you need to have an honest conversation about what you're going to tackle first, second, and third. And the priority might vary by the different constituents that you're listening to, whether it's the teachers, whether it's the central staff, whether it is the custodians, right? And they're all equally important. Yeah. So then play back, what are you going to tackle first, second, and third to support them where they are today and where they need to go going forward. Yeah. Most importantly, as well, though, you also need to listen to the key constituents, the students, the parents, and have an equal conversation with them about what you can tackle first, second, and third, and invite them to be part of that process, and then be honest what you're going to be able to execute, so that way you don't overset the expectations and then have a reverse effect.
I love this, and I'm channeling my grandmother. Her idea of how you get to trust is do what you said you were going to do. Like just do the thing, and when you can't, be upfront about that. We said we were going to do X, Y has happened, and so we're not going to be able to do that, and here's what we're putting in place instead. Now, if my husband's watching, he's gonna say, I also told you that. And when you're gonna apologize, be honest about that too, right? So really trying to get to a place of understanding this thing that we say about people aren't monoliths, and we believe that until it's time to actually be strategic about who needs what, because everybody doesn't actually need the same thing. And I'll tell you a secret, the word equality does not mean the same thing as the word equity, but folks conflate it all the time. And so how clear can we get about really understanding after all the listening, who needs what, and what can we actually do, and how do we set ourselves up to stop over-promising and under-delivering? Because part of what's in the way of trust is you just keep doing the same thing you said you weren't going to do. You just keep not honoring your word, and if we could get better about honoring our word and get quicker about naming when we couldn't and what we're going to put in place, we'd be much further down the road in terms of trust.
So true.
I really appreciate that. I appreciate that. I want to build off of that. So this idea of just being honest about what you're going to do, what you can do, what you can't do, when you need to adjust course. I'm sure each one of you have taken a closer look at your organization over the last few years. Every organization has for a variety of reasons. What has that closer look revealed, right, by way of challenges? And I ask this question because as much as we learn from best practices, we also learn from the failures, right, the hurdles that we have to clear and the challenges. So I'd love to hear from this group. What's one thing that when you looked in the mirror, you said, I need a new do, I need some new lip gloss, I need something different. Right, let us know what what was revealed, and then also let us know how you're actually working to make some adjustments.
Me? Got it.
Let's do it.
Well, I think for Murmuration, in particular, I think the thing that we looked at in the mirror and said that we need was me. and my role. And so there wasn't a chief people officer or someone focusing in on diversity, equity, and inclusion previously. And so we prioritized that. And that was something that staff were looking for. And we said, okay, we need to get this role in here. I think the other thing that is really important about that is just generally what has happened to some of your earlier questions in the Great Resignation to the role of the chief people officer and to the role of the manager and to the role of the leader, just in terms of lifting it up, in terms of its importance in keeping, retaining, and ensuring that we have equity in our organization. So that was one of the things that we looked in the mirror and we said, hey, we need somebody to focus on our staff. We need somebody to focus on our people and make sure that our people are happy.
So I will add a couple of things. One, and I'll give credit to the former CEO of the Chicago Board of Education. She built the Equity Office, and within that, we had the Equity Office framework and applied that across all functions. And once you looked at the data-driven self-assessments, you had to look at yourself in the mirror and look at the gaps, right? Look at the gaps, again, across the entire organization. Does it reflect the student body? The answer is no. And does it reflect the student body across every function that supports the students? The answer is no. So then what are we going to do about it? Both from a development perspective, from a training perspective, from a capital perspective, and then again, you start to prioritize it, right? But the mirror becomes a dashboard, right? And then looking at the dashboard and saying, are we making enough progress? And are we making enough progress fast enough?
So I love this question, and it's interesting because we also opened an office, right? So like someone needs to be paying attention to this, and so we reopened the office. But I'll say there are two big things that stand out for me, Tiffany. One, our people had been trying to tell us a thing the whole time. And so there's a degree to which we actually weren't listening with the level on the right frequency to hear things that people had been saying to us. But the other thing we did is we actually did hire an external partner to come in and help us see us. Because there's a degree to which you can't see you. You think you see you, you don't really see you. And so they helped us see this whole idea of you are doing great on what people typically traditionally talk about as diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics. You've been working on that. But this thing called racial equity, not so much. And this thing called understanding what the lived experience of people is, what's actually happening on the ground in the system to the people day to day, both those that you're serving from the perspective of children and also from the perspective of your staff, and in our case, core members. There are all these different people, constituents, stakeholders, and to what degree do you actually see them? And the last thing I'll add to this piece is, and do you recognize that just because you disaggregated the data, you're still not clear what the picture is? So when we look deeper at what is happening with the group of folks that we refer to as Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, when we look at that group, do you understand that that's 20 to 25 different groups of people? Are you telling yourself that what is true for one segment of that group is true across that group? And so we actually just got to a place of doing a much deeper level of analysis than we'd done before and realized that, again, we were operating in a place of trying to do better, trying to do right, but not paying attention to enough of the information in real time. And then this is a phrase I'm trying to get coined, y'all. I keep saying it after I say it to you. But better than is not a standard. And we were better than a lot of other folks in the industry. We were better than, but better than is actually not a standard, and it's not what we're really aspiring to. So can we get clear to a point I think you made of what is the standard? What do we want to be true? And how do we go after that as opposed to just doing better than we did the last time? The babies need better than that. So that's the other thing that we're paying attention to.
So I wanna talk about this better than, right? So we know it's not the standard right now, and we're gonna help get that term going, right? We're gonna make that happen. What are you aspiring to in your organizations, right? Every corporation, school district, nonprofit, if you go to their website, there is a declaration. And you have some employees who can recite it back. You have some leaders who can even tell you how it is just woven throughout the fabric of their strategic plan. But it doesn't mean that it's being realized. So help me understand, what are you truly aspiring to if better than isn't good enough?
Well, I will start this one off, right? And I think all of you probably have been exposed to this in one way or the other, and that is the bias of low expectations, right? And making sure that you have set a high bar, especially if you're in leadership positions. You know, coming back to the first question that you posed, right? You need to be collaborative, but then you also need to be courageous to have the tough conversations on how do you get to great and how do you get to make sure that everybody does indeed have access to equitable. I love the example you just cited, and we tend to pick metrics that says what a great progress we're making because we made such a great improvement on this subsegment of what the definition of equity means, right? And the reality is you should reflect on how you're representing the community you represent, right? And have an honest assessment if you really are making significant progress. You don't make progress by you yourself being inequitable, meaning, right, now I'll just pick on myself, right? I'm not going to be more equitable if all I'm looking for is more Latino leaders, right, than African leaders, than African American leaders, or than women, right? And so we need to make sure we're all taking a step back to make sure that we really represent the institutions that we represent and are making significant progress to represent the students again. At the end of the day, this is about education. And if it's about education, we can't forget the number one constituent, and that's the students.
The thing I would add to that is that representation is the first step, right? Like you're opening up your candidate pools, you're making sure that you have equitable outcomes, but then what happens next? And I think that's where sometimes we go a little off the rails, where we don't think about how we're treating the people on our teams, right? So whether you're a leader, whether you're a manager or a team lead, and thinking about, are we investing ourselves in the people that we're supporting in the way that really helps to fuel their outcomes and their equitable outcomes. And I think sometimes the bias on teams can come in the form of, well, this person always delivers for me, so that's the one that I'm going to give all the opportunity to. They're the ones that are going to get the raises, the promotions, and we're not being real with ourselves that the reason that person is shining is because we are giving them the opportunity. So how do you kind of step back and make sure that in your team, you're being equitable with your time, with your investment, with your development, and then also having managerial courage to have conversations that may not feel good sometimes, right?
We can talk about comfort, but that might go a little bit past our 40 minutes.
Wait a minute, Tiffany.
I know.
Let me answer this one.
Yes.
So I think the other thing that, we're really striving for, and I think staff really want to strive for, is like, what is that North Star? They want to know. They're leaving diversity, equity, inclusion conversations and sessions and like, yeah, that was great to engage in, but what does this really mean? What's the bigger picture on this? And so I think the end goal for me anyway is to leave and ensure that each person has a feeling and a belief, right? That we are committed to this and they believe in what we are doing. And I would say right now, not everybody does. And so that's what we're trying to get to, a joint and mutual feeling that everybody believes in what we're doing and the purpose of it. And right now, quite frankly, you have some people that are asking, why did I spend an hour and a half, 2 hours doing that?
Yes. Yeah.
And that is a question that should not be asked. And we don't want it to be asked when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging and the importance of that, but it is consistently asked.
So Barbara, I really want you to answer this question, but I do want to hear, I'm just being completely honest, we all know that we have people who don't necessarily believe, right, or understand the why or are committed. What do you do in those instances? How do you engage leaders, right, at every level of your organization that say, yes, I signed up to work here, be it a nonprofit, a school district, a corporation. I know you have a DEI commitment, but it's not where I am. It's not what I believe. It's not in alignment with my right values. How do you engage those leaders?
I still wanted to answer the last question.
I
but
know.
answered this question, so,
But you love me, so I took the liberty
I love
to
you
push.
dearly. Absolutely. I think a couple things are true. One, we need to be really, really careful because it's another kind of like me bias, right? So affinity bias. Like you gotta have the passion, like I got the passion, like you gotta be, but actually, if you didn't grow up on 36th and North Avenue in Milwaukee Public Schools attendee, and if you didn't live my life, you're not likely to have my passion because you don't have my identity, my background. So one, we've gotta let go of the notion that everybody's gonna feel it the way we feel it. It's just not necessarily what it's going to look like. Once I can get my head around that, then the question for me is, are you actually mission aligned? Because if you're mission aligned, then you actually have to have a different perspective on our DEI commitments and our equity and belonging commitments. Because what we're up to at Teach for America is creating a world where every single child has an experience of education that is excellent and equitable. And by no definitions are we there yet. But we're also never going to get there if we don't do the work of dealing with the fact that there's a lack of diversity and equity and inclusiveness in the world, that there's not enough belonging in the world. And so I think there are these moments in time where we just have to actually have that conversation. It's very clear to me that you love teaching. This is the conversation I had as an administrator. Super clear to me that you love teaching. It's not so clear to me that you like kids. And I believe, actually, that there's a world in which you could get to a place where both things are true, but in this moment, what I need right now is somebody who brings both of those things to the table. So let's figure out where you can make a great contribution, but it's probably not gonna be with us in this moment. And that's like a scary thing to say in a world where everybody's doing attrition studies. Who's here, who's leaving, what's happening, are we gonna be okay? Like in the moment where that's happening, but I have found in my experience of this work over time that if you got a bunch of people who are in the ship with you, who don't actually wanna row in the direction that you're trying to go, not only are you not gonna get where you're going to get anywhere. Yeah. And so you just have to get, again, honest about what you're up to. And it's okay, you're not a bad person, I don't hate you, I don't think you're out to destroy children, you're just actually not on the same mission. And when you can be there, we can do this work together. If that's not what we can do together now, then let's figure out how to help you land, and land well, because I don't want bad things for you or your family either. You just actually have to be mission aligned all the way down to, it's never the waste of time to be in this DEI session, all the way down to, I know something more about me and my identity than I did before, so that actually is going to help me do this work better. I can actually see that I can't design this AI, because some of y'all do that, right? I can't design this AI in a way that only makes space for people who look like me and think like me. If that's what I'm designing, actually that doesn't work for the world. And so that's what I could talk about this all day too, but like that's what I would offer in this moment, watching the clock.
I know. But see, that's why I knew it was okay to switch gears a little bit with you. I knew you'll be okay.
But you know, to add to that though, when you think about that, you were so right about, thinking about others, understanding where you've been, right? And so just thinking about how to make people feel seen, valued, and supported, right? And also making the connection. So when you think about empathetic leadership, it's about opening yourself up to hear and understand people's journeys and understand what their true selves are and their authentic selves and what they're bringing to it. Sometimes we generalize things too much, but when you start to actually hear how people are impacted or how they've faced racism or how they've faced harassment and things, it actually starts to make even people who may not be that gung-ho start to feel educated about what's happening. And I think all of us are about a mission of education. And so I think we have to create that safe space where everybody feels that they can learn and understand and connect. Like it's the connection that actually makes the dedication, in my opinion.
I think, Barbara, to your point, I totally agree with you. And what I have found to be the challenge is that individual that is a good teacher, but we're not really sure if they like kids, they're going to tell you, I love kids.
Of course they are.
Right? And so how do you actually get that individual to see that they're not mission aligned? Because they believe, like, to their darndest that they are. Yeah. And so what does that look like? Yeah.
I would just add two more things. One is it comes back to the actual investment that you make on developments, and how do you demonstrate what connection, authentic connection, leads to authentic caring. And if you need to authentic caring, you'll be able to connect with the students. And that comes back to EQ, right? And making sure that we're investing in the soft skills so that the teachers, doesn't matter what they look like, can connect authentically with the student body they're working with today in order to be able to connect. And once you connect, they'll be able to earn the first word that you use, which is trust.
Yes.
Once you earn their trust, God, they'll start to learn.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it in action. And if you can find the formula to teach caring at scale, we wouldn't be talking about some of the issues that we're having today.
I knew I would find it. This is where I get to define why grace is one of my words. I was like, just keep talking. You're going to say it. Somebody will say it. No, I think truly, though, one of the reasons that grace is the word that I use to define my leadership is because it's also possible that you've never had an experience that allowed you to figure out you actually could like kids. And so what's the investment that we make? What's the space that we create for you to be honest about what you do and don't have and why you do and don't have it? And then we can figure out, can we decide together to be about some work that leads you to that place? Because the expectation that I am going to say everything right, get everything right, know everything that it's just not human. Because actually perfection is not a human capacity. And in a world where we're talking about like, how do we put down white dominant culture? Well, you can't hold perfection and put that down. So how do we actually create enough grace to be able to see people, meet with them where they are, and then figure out together, can we be on this journey, or do you really not like kids, even though you pretending that you like kids, but like you really don't? Like, how do we get clear about that with enough space for real people to show up in all their flaws? Because I am a flawed human being. It's the definition of being human. How do we make enough space and enough grace for people to be true and honest about where they are? Figure out if we can do the work together. Are you down to do this work with me? And if you're not, we'll make a different set of choices. But how do we actually get to that place of grace between us?
So we're talking about creating space. We're talking about learning and development. We're talking about having conversations. We're talking about supporting managers. What does that look like? Right? Because oftentimes we bring people in, we have onboarding, we say, take this set of training, make sure you also take this annual anti-harassment training. I'm going to tell you about microaggressions. And sometimes it stops there. We've been talking about insufficiency, right? So what does that ongoing learning and development and space making look like in your organizations?
So Tiffany and I are like old friends, and we used to work together. And one of the things that she told me when we were getting ready to do some work together was people forget because they think you only do training when you go to the training, but actually you learn 70% of the job doing the job. Mm-hmm. And so part of my answer to this is, how does it actually just become part of the work, not the aside thing that I do? Mm-hmm. Now I got to go to your thing for the No, actually, this is part of the work. Mm-hmm. And so part of what we're really learning and focusing in on for ourselves is, what does it look like if this is actually integrated? Mm-hmm. What does it look like if we never have a check-in without having a conversation about this? Even back to another question you'd asked before, how do we get to a place of accountability? No, I actually expect you to be living into DEI, and we're gonna have goals and objectives and metrics that we're monitoring that help me see whether or not you're doing that day to day, as opposed to once as a single data point on a single day. We like live data drive-bys. That's not healthy. We like actually gotta get into a regular flow of information. And so I think that's part of it. It's the integration of the work so that it's not this standalone side thing that I do when I feel like it and or when you talk about it and or when the calendar says today's the day. Yeah. That's part of what we're trying. And we haven't figured it out. Like that's part of what we're working towards. Yep.
Yeah. So to build off of that, like our CEO was very clear about the commitment, and so much so that we wrote it into the job description. So at least 5% of every single staff member's time would be dedicated to diversity, equity, inclusion, and it is required that you serve on a diversity, equity, inclusion subcommittee. And so that's one of the ways that we have integrated it. And it's really interesting because prior to coming to Murmuration, there has always been like a conversation on whether you should require diversity, equity, inclusion or not. The thought being, if you require it, you're forcing people to do it, and they're going to do it out of spite rather than want. And now I'm at an organization where we require it, and I think it's better. It's much better to say, like, everybody needs to do this, and similar to what we were saying before, this is who we are as an organization, and if you want to be on board, okay. If not, then this is not the organization for you. But it is required here to do this work.
Appreciate that.
I also think it's about how to get the feedback. Meaning, so if we just go back to managers, right? It's very rare that managers are always giving feedback to employees, right? So it's almost like it's one directional. But then you don't have a lot of employees giving feedback on managers, right? And I think that's where you stop the growth sometimes. Because in order to really grow and mature and to have the mirror in front of your face, you kind of need that honest feedback from employees. So how do you create that openness and environment of transparency where employees feel like they can give direct feedback to their managers even? And I don't think we have gotten there even across any organization.
Yeah.
And so I think, working towards that also, because it goes back to, yes, you can require it, but how do you make sure that it's actually getting done? And so there's reporting that you do, but it's really employees that know whether or not it's happening. Like they're the real mirror in front of us.
Okay, so I love the comment that you made about experiential learning. The best way to learn is actually to apply it at when you need it. And so as a district or as a system, you have to invest in it to make sure the tools and the support system is there. So when the teachers need it, they have it, right? Or when the administrators need it, they have it. The administrators are busy with a ton of things, and so the last thing they're thinking about is, I need to allocate time for the next day for training and development. It's not as effective. The other thing that I would add, though, is we will never get to success if we keep thinking about D&I as an initiative, right? And so if we keep thinking about it as an initiative, it's got to be embedded into the DNA of all the organizations and all the institutions. Otherwise, we won't get there.
I love that. So I have 15 more questions, and we have 3 minutes. So there's that. So I'm going to ask each of you, and I'm going to start with Antoinette. I would love for you to briefly share with us how your identity, right, has impacted and influenced your role as an inequity disruptor and as a people leader. And that's the last gem that I'd love for you to leave our audience with. Okay?
So I identify as an African-American female by way of Ghana, any West Africans in the house, and Alabama. My mom's African-American, and it came through Alabama. And so my identity is really, really important to me. And I think, similarly to what you said, Barbara, I bring it to the work every single day. And it is something that allows for me to lead with empathy as I try to learn and understand other folks. And so I think just my experiences have really impacted the way that I see the work and the importance of the work. But more importantly, I think how I try to drive the work forward. And so that is one of the things that I think how my identity has really impacted my ability to do this work.
All right. Go keep it tight.
All
right.
You see how that was for me? Like that? I am Dr. Barbara Logan Smith. I am the granddaughter of sharecroppers from Mississippi. I am Black. I am a woman. I have been in the world as somebody who comes from a low-income background. It's why I told you I am Dr. Barbara Logan Smith, because the expectation was not that this is what will be true for me.
Yes.
And I'm special to my mama and my daddy. But Chris, my husband, also thinks I'm special. That's cool, but the reality is there is nothing happening inside my brain that could not be happening inside the brains of everybody else. And so understanding who I am is understanding all of that, but also understanding that I deeply believe in the brilliance of people. And anything that is blocking that brilliance has to be dealt with. That's how I lead. That's who I am. That's what I have to offer the world.
Thank you. All right.
Born and raised in Mexico, grew up in a little village where the most education that I could aspire to was 6th grade. And so growing up in that environment, I immigrated when I was 10, from my grandparents. I actually grew up with my grandparents because my parents couldn't afford to bring me when they first immigrated. They left me there when I was 2, right? And so they went back to me, but went to get me when I was 10. We crossed actually a border nearby here on our way up to Chicago, where I survived CPS. I navigated the system and was able to navigate the gangs, the drugs. And I was one of 519 freshmen that started high school, and only 160 of us graduated. Less than 10 went off to a four-year university, and a handful graduated with a degree or an advanced degree. That's why I serve.
Thank you. All right, Melissa.
And I'll do it really quick.
Thank you.
So, of course, I'm white and a woman.
Yes.
But I actually didn't graduate college. I went to 1 year of college, and then I fell into a really great opportunity that allowed me a lot of really great opportunities to build up to where I am today. And then about 3 years ago, I went back to college to get my degree to make sure my kids did. But it's one of those things where I empathize with people who do go kind of off the path or have different backgrounds or, have different life experiences, that we all have opportunity, but sometimes we don't have equal opportunity,
Yes.
right? And so just understanding that and making sure that I'm a champion for people to make sure they can get the equal opportunity they need and deserve.
All right. Well, thank you all for sharing your wisdom and your brilliance. Thank you all for joining us.